When Sidney Rogerson first published his book 12 Days on the Somme back in 1933, a newspaper review at the time suggested it's a book that every Englishman should read. In it, Rogerson gives a very frank and honest account of trench life, but in spectacular detail. What is so unique about this account is that he paints a very clear geographical picture of exactly where he spent 3 days in the front line on the battlefield, making it just about possible to virtually pinpoint Rogerson's exact movements and location. So I've come to the Somme to do just that. When Rogerson arrived on the Somme in November 1916 with the 2nd Battalion West Yorkshire Regiment, the battle was already 4 months old. The hot, putrid summer and all the memories and horrors of July the 1st were a thing of the distant past. The battle had become bogged down into a conflict of attrition. In fact, many of the original objectives set for the first week of battle were still miles out of reach, and it was a case of inching forward bit by bit. Rogerson himself commented the distances on the Somme weren't measured in miles, but in mud. Rogerson began his journey on the Somme here at a holding camp known as Camp 34 between Troneswood and Bernafaywood. The war machine had completely steamrolled the entire area. There wasn't really much left standing of the woods themselves, but the space in between served as a transit camp for troops moving up towards the front line, which was about 3 miles in that direction. When they arrived, the camp was in a dreadful state. Rogerson ordered his men to go and salvage whatever materials they could to make their time here a little bit more comfortable. And it was here they spent a couple of days waiting for the signal to move up to the front line. So on the 9th of November 1916, the battalion was given orders to move up to the front line. They came along an axis somewhere around this road, the Ganchy to Littleworth Road, and back then it just would have been mud, probably just a duckboard track. And you think of all the shells whizzing in, there would have been constant transport. Distance was only 3 miles. It took the battalion 7 hours to reach the front line. Their destination was here, the village of Littleworth. In fact, when Rogerson arrived, there wasn't much of a village left standing after weeks and months of artillery bombardment. In fact, it had only been captured 3 weeks earlier during the battle for Le Tronsoir Ridge, which is just over there, and that's where Rogerson was, and that's where we're going right now. Using British, French and German trench maps dated November 1916 and comparing it to modern satellite images, we can clearly see the scars of the old trenches still impacting the environment today. Rogerson describes a place called Dewdrop Trench, which is right in this field right here. And as he came up from the village, which is just over there, he described seeing the bodies of hundreds of khaki-clad soldiers. He said that the British khaki outnumbered the German grey by 3 to 1. Leaving Dewdrop Trench behind them, they ascended this slope, where at the top they found the 2nd Devonshires occupying Fool Trench. This was the front line. I've just got to the top of the ridge, and would you believe it, the latter part of the 20th century has gotten in the way. The London to Paris rail route. Obviously during the war there was no railway and there was no motorway either, so these are modern developments for modern times. I just found this on the edge of a field just now, and it's a sobering reminder of what took place here. In a bid to consolidate the position, Rogerson ordered the deepening and strengthening of the trenches they had come to occupy, which were originally just a few shell holes linked together. Interestingly, when you look at the British trench map dated November 1916, these trenches dug by Rogerson's battalion don't show up, but a German trench map dated November 21st clearly shows a small network of trenches that didn't show up on the British maps. I just picked this up. It's a piece of screw picket, evidence of the miles of barbed wire fences that would have strung right across this region, stretching for hundreds and thousands of miles. The only orders the West Yorks were given for this short tour was nothing more than to hold the line. They didn't make any attacks, there were no trench raids, it was simply a case of staying alert but keeping their heads down. In the process of reinforcing the line, Rogerson detailed a party of men to dig a couple of saps out into no man's land to gain better observation of the enemy. During the night, an officer leading one of the work parties went missing, and in the confusion, Rogerson sent one of his best friends, 2nd Lieutenant Skett, to go look for him. Down in the trench, Skett turned to one of his men and handed him some of his personal effects. As he climbed up onto the firing step and clambered out over the parapet, a stray bullet fired completely at random found its mark. Skett died instantly, taking the bullet to the head. As for Pym, his body was never recovered, and Rogerson described it as one of the great mysteries of the war. Just walking along the edge of this field here, and I've already picked up several pieces of shrapnel that came from the artillery bombardment. This whole entire area is absolutely littered with tiny pieces of metal. Incredible. The exact location of Full Trench is now lost to the construction of the high-speed railway and the busy A1 motorway. Looking back towards that point, we can see what it would have looked like from the German perspective. The foreground was unoccupied no man's land, with Full Trench somewhere between the road and railway. The church tower at Les Boeufs is just over a mile away, but the British front line no more than a third of that. They were practically within spitting distance of each other. A German strongpoint known as Cemetery Circle, marked here on the British maps, was a formidable fortified position. It can still be seen today, except the sandbags and machine guns are long gone, and the crucifixes and gravestones have returned. Here, I can't quite make out if it's still live. There's a part of me that wants to find out. There's a part of me that thinks, what if I do find out and I'm not here to tell the tale? I'm going to leave it. It's just so difficult to imagine what this place must have looked like. Rogerson describes it as being completely devoid of feature, no tree left standing. The only colour was the colour of mud for miles and miles. The place was just pockmarked with shell holes. It's incredible. As you can see, man and nature have spent the best part of the last 9 or 10 decades returning this land to its intended use, growing crops, not casualties. After the armistice, many of the bodies that were scattered in the fields around here were interred here at this cemetery just outside Fleur. And one of those that's buried is 2nd Lieutenant Skett. After 3 days in the front line, Rogerson and his men were relieved by the 2nd Worcestershire Regiment. They were marched back to the village of Montauban, just here, where they were put into another holding camp before being taken further back behind the line. For them, for the time being, the danger was over, but it wouldn't be long before they would be back in the firing line. The tragic cost of human life in war is never more apparent than it is here at Thiepval, where the names of over 72,000 men who have no known grave are commemorated on what is the largest British memorial in the world. And one of those commemorated here is Pym, the officer that went missing that fateful night. place is synonymous with horrendous death and destruction, and the evidence of World War I plain for all to see. Whenever I come here, I always get this really strange sense of peace and tranquility, and it's a really odd juxtaposition and something that I don't think I'll ever really understand.